storm kept brushing the town with long, wet sleeves as if it wanted to wipe something away. When I turned into the side lot of Halcyon Bay Bank, the rain slowed to a steady whisper that made the night feel careful. A single light above the service door turned the mist into tiny silver insects. I sat a moment with the engine ticking and the wipers resting and told myself one last time that I could do this in the morning. I turned the key anyway. Inside, the lobby smelled like wool and old envelopes. The night guard raised his head from a crossword and gave me the kind look that people give to neighbors they do not know well. I slid my license under the small camera, wrote my name on the log, and watched him compare the signature. He tried a remark about the weather. I returned a small answer. We understood each other. Neither of us was here to make friends. We were here to perform the quiet work that allows a place like this to feel safe. The vault corridor felt colder than the lobby by a few careful degrees. The metal had a hush to it, a presence that worked on the body like a command to breathe softly. I put the small brass key in my palm and read the numbers along its spine. 314. The digits had been hiding in a cardboard box that still carried the faint smell of an attic. We had pulled that box from my mother Meredith's storage after a pipe burst. The label on the side read Sloane's Anchor in a faded blue that made my chest tighten in a way I could not explain. The attendant took my key and matched it with the twin on his belt. He slid out a long drawer and set it on a table under a sleepy red camera. He nodded and stepped away. Privacy here always felt like a courtesy act, even when it was the rule. I rested my hands on the cool edge and studied the face of the box. I have done this many times with many other kinds of boxes. Flight cases, shipping crates, evidence lockers. It is the same ritual each time. Slow the breath. Notice the small signs. Touch the thing only when you have already seen it in your mind. When I lifted the lid, I found a manila folder tied with cotton string, a small stack of photographs, and a single postcard with a lighthouse on the front. I took the postcard first. The paper had softened at the corners from time in a pocket or maybe from a careful thumb that went back to the same words again and again. I turned it over. For your 30th birthday. Love, E. Sloane. I read it once. I read it again. I am 32. No one gave me this when I turned 30. There was no surprise dinner, no mysterious envelope with a cake. There was a call from my unit and then a quiet night at the kitchen table with takeout and the sound of rain like a memory. If this card had been written, it had also been stopped. By what? By who? I set the card down and untied the folder. The title on the cover looked like it had been printed on a machine that respected ink, Sloane Education Endowment. Below it, a stamp in blue-red supplement. The first page was a legal addendum. I recognized the cadence of this kind of writing, a voice that wears a suit. It named the founder of the endowment. It described the purpose, educational access for underserved youth in the Bay Area. It named trustees, Agnes Donnelly. I pictured Agnes in her housecoat with a romance novel and a cigarette she would never admit to. It named a temporary guardian, Victor Hale. I pictured Victor in one of his precise shirts, hands clean, voice smoother than a church floor. It included Meredith Robbins as a signatory in case of family emergency. I pictured my mother rearranging a drawer until every utensil lay in its lane like a row of well-behaved fish. The addendum also named a beneficiary to be brought into governance upon reaching legal age. The beneficiary line contained my date of birth. It contained my full name. I lifted the second page and felt the skin along my arms start to hum. A certified copy of a birth record lay under the addendum. The mother line was typed. The signature in pen flowed across it with a confidence that almost felt like comfort. Mother, Eleanor Sloane. The father line was blank. The word mother is simple. The meaning is not. I leaned closer as if the letters might change under my breath. They did not. I set my thumb along the edge of the paper to stop the slight shake that had started in my hand. The habit came back the way a drill comes back. Count to 3. Breathe. Let the noise in the body become information instead of panic. My work has taught me that. So did a childhood that trained me to hold my face steady while a room tried to tell me what to feel. I reached for the photographs. The first showed a young woman with her hair pulled back and a smile that looked as if it had fought for air and won. She held a baby who gripped a shirt collar with a small, serious fist. Behind them, a sign leaned into the frame at an angle. I could read Sloane's Anch before the word cut off. The second photo was a clear view of a storefront. Sloane's Anchor Bookshop. In the window, someone had written free writing class Friday, bring your first sentence, and a pencil. The third photo was only a child on a rug with crayons and a circle of light like a coin. The child could have been anyone. but the way the toes curled at the end of a small foot tugged on a drawer in my memory where I keep odd details. I remembered a summer night when the power failed, and I drew the shape of a moonlit square again and again until my mother put the box away and told me not to waste the good colors. I placed the photos in a neat line and returned to the legal frame. The addendum described a contingency plan in case the founder of the endowment was missing or incapacitated for more than 5 years. A temporary guardianship had been assigned. Administrative signatory privileges had been transferred. The words were calm. They did not match the sensation in my body that something in the air had changed shape and I could not yet see it. A soft sound behind me pulled my attention back into the room. The attendant cleared his throat with professional tact. A clock over the vault door was preparing to strike the hour. When power flickers here, he had told me earlier, the timing relays can be dramatic. The idea of being in a concrete room when the lights argued with the building made my shoulders tight. I gathered the documents in their original order, tied the cotton string, and placed the postcard on top. For your 30th birthday. Love, E. Sloan. The sentence felt like a chair pulled out and waiting at an empty table. The guard stamped my exit slip. I walked through the lobby that had learned to hold echoes. Outside, the rain had softened into a damp silver net. I tucked the folder inside my coat and took the long way around the building toward the lot. The bay breathed somewhere out there in the dark like a patient animal. Halcyon Bay has a way of pretending that nothing changes. It smiles while it hides old stories under fresh paint. I slid into the car and set the folder in the passenger seat. I buckled it without thinking. The reflex made me laugh once, a small, dry sound that surprised me. I put both hands on the wheel and waited for my heart to settle. The dashboard clock told me I was not late. The feeling under my ribs told me I was. At the first red light, I took out the postcard again. The date stamp on the corner was faint but still there. The month before my 30th birthday, the right year, whoever wrote it had sent it on time. The failure had happened somewhere after that. The light changed and I placed the card back into the folder, then slid the folder under my coat as if I was sheltering something alive. My phone buzzed when I turned onto our street. Unknown number. I almost let it go. Habit saved me and doomed me at the same time. I answered. Rain on the other end, then a voice that seemed designed to forget itself. Leave the past alone. The line died. A second later, my screen lit with a message. A photo of my house from across the street. The porch light glowed the way my mother likes it, as if it was a promise we always keep. A shape moved in the living room window. I looked up at the real scene and saw the same shape drift and settle. The tiny shake returned to my arms. I turned it into work. Save the image. Send a copy to the secure inbox. Make a note of time and direction. Scan the street without moving my head. White sedan at the corner. Dent on the rear bumper. No movement. A bicycle leaned on a fence 2 houses down. A cat under a truck thinking heavy thoughts. Nothing else. I cut the engine and listened as the rain turned from whisper to quiet. I slid the folder inside my coat again, leaving the postcard in the outer pocket where I could touch it. I opened the door and stepped into the breath of the wet night. The air smelled like the metal of the bay and the lemon cleaner my mother uses on the kitchen floor. Inside the hall, the shoes by the bench had been lined up more carefully than they had been in the morning. That meant my mother had been thinking. The television murmured about the storm. In the kitchen, a spoon touched porcelain and made a gentle bell sound. I walked in with the folder held like a book I was not ready to lend. My mother stood by the sink in a sweater the color of oatmeal. Victor leaned against the counter with his back very straight and his attention on a phone that had become part of his hand. When they looked up, their faces both tried for normal. Meredith's mouth made the shape of a smile. Victor made his eyebrows rise the way people do when they want to look surprised before they feel it. You are out late, my mother said. I opened the folder and took out the postcard and placed it on the table between us. For your 30th birthday, I said. From E. Sloan. Her fingers went to the small chain at her throat and stayed there. Victor did not look at the card. He looked at me the way a chess player looks at an opponent who has reached for a piece that can still be countered. What is that? My mother asked, and the spoon on the counter gave a small shiver. A key led me to a box, I said. The box held this card and a file about an endowment. The file has my name on it. The file also has a birth record. It names a mother I have not heard you name. There is no reason to make a scene, Victor said. His voice never needs to raise itself. It arrives already ironed. I am not making a scene, I said. I am stating facts. There is an endowment called Sloan Education. It was configured to bring me into governance when I came of age. Instead, the administrative power went to you. I would like to know why. My mother sat down. She did it without sound. She placed her palms flat on the table as if smoothing a map. Her eyes went not to me but to the card. She read the sentence as if it might change the second time through. For your 30th birthday. Love, E. Sloan. Who is E. Sloan? I asked. She said my name once in the short form that she rarely uses now. Roe. The word left her lips like a breath, did not know what shape it wanted. She did not answer my question. Victor slipped his phone into his pocket and drew his shoulders back a little. We can discuss this in a way that protects everyone, he said. There is no need to involve outsiders. These matters can be misunderstood by people who enjoy drama. I looked at him and then at my mother. I kept my voice level. The time for outsiders has already arrived, I said. Someone sent a photo of our house to my phone while I sat in the car. Someone called from a number I do not know and told me to leave the past alone. So I would like the truth from the two people in this room who claim to care about my future. My mother reached for the card again. She turned it over and her thumb paused where the date stamp lived. Her eyes closed for one count. She opened them and met mine. You found a box because you were meant to find it, she said, and her voice had a tired music I had not heard in years. You found it late because I could not bear for you to find it on time. The room contracted around that sentence. I waited for her to go on. She did not. I felt the careful training of 100 briefings rise in me like a scaffolding. Keep the question simple. Keep the air safe enough that an answer can cross it. Who is Alina Sloan? I asked. My mother looked at the floor as if the wood had a memory only she could read. Victor opened his mouth and then closed it. The television in the other room moved on to a story about a road closure. The spoon on the counter had stopped trembling. The storm outside took a breath. I sat down across from my mother and folded my hands to keep them still. I could wait. I have waited in rooms with less furniture and more danger. I could wait here while the truth climbed whatever distance it needed. I touched the edge of the postcard with one finger. The paper felt warm from my mother's hand. Tell me, I said. She looked older in that moment than she had an hour earlier. Not tired in the ordinary way, but like a person who has carried something heavy for a very long time while pretending it weighed nothing. She reached for the cup, took a small sip, and set it down with care. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. When she spoke, the words came evenly, as if she had practiced them and also as if she did not trust them. Alina Sloan was a journalist in this town, she said. She ran a bookshop that held free writing classes for kids who did not have much. She believed in the kind of sentences that could make a person stand up straighter. She believed in the kind of truth that makes people angry. Was, I said, past tense. My mother nodded once. She was involved in a story about misuse of educational funds. A few people with reach did not like that. Things were said. Things were suggested. She left town. She was not ready to be a mother. The air moved in my chest like a slow wave. I picked up the postcard and read the neat line again. For your 30th birthday. Love, E. Sloan. The word love felt less like a chair now and more like a door with light under it. You knew her, I said, not just as a name in an article. My mother let out a breath that surprised her. I knew her. She looked at her hands. The flat gold band on her finger shone against the soft kitchen light. I knew her well enough to know she was trying not to be afraid. I knew her well enough to know that she was. She swallowed. I kept letters. I kept a few photos. I kept that card. I told myself I would give it to you when it felt safer. She blinked once as if to push away a thought. Safety is a very flexible word when you have a child, she said. Victor shifted. He once taught me that he could be completely still for long stretches when a conversation did not serve him. He had not moved for several minutes, and that itself was an answer. I turned to him. You were given administrative power over the endowment, I said. The addendum names you. Why did you take it? Why did you keep it? He did not flinch. The board asked for continuity, he said. Agnes trusted me. He looked almost pleased to say that. When a founder disappears, someone must prevent the work from collapsing. I did that. I made sure the mission continued. You made sure which mission continued, I asked. The one written in the charter or the one that made you look generous at dinners? A brief smile crossed his face and left it unchanged. Words like that do not help us, he said. You are letting the dramatic parts of this obscure the practical ones. Money is messy when it tries to do good. People require salaries. Light bulbs need to be replaced. Cars need to be purchased for outreach. He spread his hands. The list is long. I said nothing. He filled the silence with his favorite thing, which is his own voice. He began to explain the difference between a stipend and a grant. He explained how a small nonprofit must sometimes create a limited liability company to protect its community work from legal threats. He explained tax treatment as if I had not filed returns since I was 18. He was building a web where every line was a justification. I watched the way the thread stuck to his fingers. At the center of his words sat one heavy bead. He had moved money into a private entity called North Star Learning. The director of that entity was Charlotte Hale, his niece by blood and my cousin by marriage. The company contracted services from a branding firm where Charlotte had friends. The company owned a vehicle. The company had a travel budget that matched her social media posts almost perfectly. "You have been careful," I said. "You have not been careful enough." His eyes held a glint that I had seen during arguments about curfews when I was 16. He is a man who believes confidence is the same as innocence. He said, "All of this was disclosed to those who needed to know. The work has continued. That is what matters." The spoon on the counter made a small sound again. My mother had moved it without thinking. I turned back to her. "Why did you keep the card?" I asked. "Why not give it to me on the day it was meant for?" She lifted her eyes to mine, and for the first time tonight there was no attempt to arrange her face. "I was afraid," she said. "The letters told me things I could not fix. I thought if I held the pieces, then the story could not hurt you. I thought if I kept the door shut, you would never walk through it." A small warmth moved under my ribs. It was not forgiveness. It was recognition. Fear spends its life pretending to be love. It borrows the language and the clothing. It cannot carry the weight. I pulled my chair a little closer to the table. I placed the folder in the center and opened it. I arranged the photographs like a path: the young woman with the fighting smile, the window sign, the rug, and the circle of light. I did not push them across because I did not want this to feel like evidence. I wanted it to feel like the truth finally remembering how to speak. "I will be asking a lawyer for a formal accounting," I said. "There will be copies of every transfer to North Star. There will be invoices. There will be mileage reports. There will be emails." I looked at Victor. "I will ask for the documents now so that the court does not have to ask for them later. That will be the helpful thing you can do." He opened his mouth and closed it. He weighed the words court and helpful as if they carried different metals. He smiled the way some people clench a fist. "I can provide records," he said. His voice softened one notch. "We can also come to an agreement that recognizes your late entrance into this history." His eyes cut to my mother. "You do not want the public to misunderstand an old family story." The call from the unknown number replayed in my mind. Leave the past alone. I thought of the photo of our house, the porch light smooth as a coin. I thought of how quiet the street had been. I thought of the way my name had sat on the page with the word beneficiary and had not flinched. "I prefer records," I said. He narrowed his eyes just enough to register the message. When he spoke again, the performance was gone. "Fine," he said. "I will have my office prepare a packet. You will see what the work looks like when it is done by people who understand it." He pushed away from the counter and left the room without waiting for permission. The living room received him, and the television raised its volume a touch, the way a room tries to please a person who insists on being soothed. My mother reached across the table and placed 2 fingers on the edge of the photo of the bookshop. She did not move it. She only touched it like a person who wanted to know if a thing was still real. "I am sorry," she said. It sounded like the truth and also like something she had told herself so often that the edges had dulled. "I will need to speak to her," I said. "To whom?" my mother asked, though I think she already knew. "To a leaner," I said, "to the woman who wrote this card. To the woman who started the thing that has my name in it." I looked at the date stamp again. "She sent this 2 years ago. It reached you. It did not reach me." My mother closed her eyes for a breath. When she opened them, there was a kind of surrender there that did not look weak. "There is a box in my room," she said. "It is the one I kept at the back of the closet behind the winter coats." "Bring it here." I went down the hall and into her room that always smells faintly of lavender and starch. The box was exactly where she said it would be: old cardboard with a strip of tape that had learned to be decorative rather than useful. I carried it to the kitchen and set it on the table. She peeled the tape with slow, careful motions, as if the sound alone could change what was inside. There were letters. Not many. A handful with neat loops and a certainty in the titles of the days. There were 2 more postcards with the lighthouse and the gull. There was a small envelope with a tiny lock of hair that had been clipped from a baby without much ceremony. There was a bus ticket stub with a town name printed in faded ink. Wexler. There was a photograph of 2 women laughing with their heads thrown back. One was my mother many years younger. The other was the woman with the fighting smile. I touched the bus ticket. "Why Wexler?" I asked. My mother shrugged in a way that did not hide the pain of not knowing. The last letter that did not sound frightened mentioned a place that sold cameras on a street near the river. She said she liked how the owner repaired old things with patience. The ticket is from that month. I went to look for her once. I did not find her. I came home and decided that keeping you safe here mattered more than chasing a ghost there. I held the ticket up to the kitchen light and saw the date bleed through. My mind did what it does. It began to build a map. Wexler, street near the river. Camera shop. People who repair old things tend to stay. People who are in hiding tend to choose work that lets them control the light that reaches them. I felt a small pulse of focus in my head that I recognize from work. The world narrows. The noise falls away. The line appears. I set the ticket down. I took out my phone and photographed each letter front and back. I did not ask permission. My mother watched me do it with a quiet that told me she approved even if it hurt. I forwarded each image to a secure address I use when I need a wall that is not electronic to hold a secret. I wrote a timestamp in a small notebook I keep for things that should not live only in memory. I will be driving to Wexler, I said. My mother did not try to stop me. She has learned that attempting to hold me still only guarantees I leave faster. Be careful, she said. Her voice had the hush that halls have late in a hospital. Do not go alone. I will let Harlan know in the morning, I said. I will go alone for tonight. I wanted the next move to belong to me before it belonged to any system. She nodded and gathered the letters back into the box with the care she gives to fragile ornaments in winter. She kept the postcard from the safe deposit box out on the table. She smoothed it with her palm and then slid it toward me. Take it now, she said. Take the card I should have given you 2 years ago. I put it in my pocket and felt the small weight of the paper find its place against my hip. I looked at her and tried to form a sentence that contained both the ache and the gratitude. None of the ordinary words felt right, so I said a simple thing. Thank you for telling me. It landed between us like a bridge that has no railings and is still somehow safe to cross. The rain had almost stopped when I stepped outside. The street smelled like wet wood and salt. The white sedan at the corner was gone. The cat under the truck had taken the night off. I walked to my car with my shoulders square and my head up. I have learned that the body can teach the mind sometimes. If you move like you are not prey, you start to believe you are not. I settled behind the wheel and sat very still for a count of 5. The porch light made a small halo on the steps. I thought about the line on the postcard. I thought about the way my mother's fingers had moved when she touched the photo of the bookstore. I thought about the photo of our house sent by a voice that wanted me to leave the past alone. I started the engine and pulled away. At the end of the block, I did not turn toward the highway. I turned toward the marina instead. I rolled down the window and let the wet air enter. The masts clinked their quiet music. The bay lay dark and patient and larger than my questions. I spoke out loud in the empty car so that the words would sound real. My name is Monroe Robbins. My mother is Meredith Robbins. My mother is also Eleanor Sloan. Both can be true. The endowment belongs to the work it was meant to do. The work belongs to the children who will write their first sentence on a piece of paper that smells like chalk dust and hope. My next step is Wexler. My next step is a door with a bell above it, and the smell of camera oil, and the habit of someone who repairs old things with patience. My next step is a woman who smiled like she had fought for air and won. A gull cried somewhere out over the dark water. The sound cut clean and then was gone. I rolled the window up and drove home the long way, letting the town pass by like a set of pages I had lived inside for so long that I forgot it was a story. Tonight the margins had shifted. Tonight the author had changed. Tonight the pen felt warm in my hand. Dawn found me already on the road, the sky the color of a bruise that was healing. The bay fell behind in a slow gray fade. My phone sat face down in the cup holder like a quiet witness. I did not want the unknown number to climb into the car with me. I wanted only the voice of the engine and the thin ribbon of state highway that unspooled toward a town I had never bothered to visit. Wexler arrived in pieces. First the old billboards along the river road, then a water tower with flaking paint, then a run of brick buildings that had learned to let ivy have its way. I pulled into a diner that looked like every diner I have ever trusted. Chrome that tried its best, coffee that pretended to be strong, a bell above the door that made a sound like a memory. I chose a back booth where the wall let me watch the whole room. The waitress poured coffee without asking and gave me a smile that said she had already seen everything that could happen before 9 in the morning. I opened my notebook and drew a simple line down the page. On one side I wrote names. On the other I wrote actions. It is a habit that steadies me. I do not let feelings make the first cut. I let verbs do it. Names: Eleanor Sloan, Meredith Robbins, Victor Hale, Charlotte Hale, Harlan Ortiz. Actions. Sent postcard. Withheld postcard. Assumed administration. Moved funds. Advised discovery. I added Wexler to the top of the page, and under that I wrote camera shop near river. I touched the bus ticket that I had tucked into the notebook. The paper had become softer with age. It felt like the kind of clue that waits patiently until you are ready to see it. I searched public records on my laptop. County filings are a small city of their own. People leave footprints when they think they are invisible. Northstar Learning had been registered 12 years ago with a mailing address in Halcyon Bay. A year later, it added a secondary address in a P.O. box in a town near Wexler. The director line named Charlotte Hale in a font that looked too certain for a person so young at the time. I felt the slow, clean anger that comes when a pattern starts to show its face. I texted Harlan a single sentence. Need your eyes on a nonprofit registry and a chain of contracts. He replied with a thumbs up and a request for a list. I sent him the names, the years, and the P.O. box. He called immediately. I let it ring once so that I could be sure my voice sounded like mine. You are already there, he said, always 2 steps ahead of my advice. His tone added the word good. Wexler, I said, I have a thread. Camera shop near the river. The bus ticket points to that month. If she is not there now, someone who knows cameras might remember a woman who needed to disappear. People who repair old things tend to care about detail. They notice. Harlan hummed in agreement. I will start a demand for accounting today, he said. If Northstar resists, we file a petition. We will not have to shout to get a court to listen to this one. Start a timeline in your own words while it is still warm. He paused. And tell me if anyone follows you. There was a white sedan last night, I said. Dented bumper. Could be nothing. Could be something that wants to look like nothing. I heard him reach for a pen the way he does when he is thinking. Send me a photo if you see it again, he said. And keep your phone on. Harlan never says be careful out loud. He folds it into other words. I hung up and closed the laptop while the coffee cooled. The diner had filled with workers in boots and city employees with fluorescent stripes. The bell rang and settled. A child with syrup on her cheek stared at me with the solemn interest that children have when they sense a secret. I smiled at her and she returned to her pancakes. The camera shop was 3 blocks from the diner on a street that ran parallel to the river. Old brick, tall windows, a painted sign with a simple name, Stone's Instant. The door had a small bell. I stood outside for a moment and looked at the display. A row of vintage cameras sat like small animals with patient eyes. A handwritten card said, "We still develop film. Bring your stories." I reached for the handle and stopped because I wanted the bell to tell me how I felt when it sounded. I took one breath. I wiped my palm on my jeans. I opened the door. The bell chimed once with a sound that made the room feel smaller in a good way. The shop smelled like dust and metal and the clean vinegar of developer. A woman stood behind the counter with a soft gray apron and a pencil tucked behind her ear. She had the kind of face that curiosity chooses. She looked up and gave me the cultivated small smile of a person who has learned not to let her eyes give away the whole story at once. "Morning," she said. "Morning," I answered. My voice did not shake. That felt like a small private victory. The wall behind her held framed black and white portraits. Hands, mostly. A fisherman holding a line. An old woman resting her palm against a window. A child with bandaged fingers clutching a pencil as if it were a branch above a river. The photographer had loved the way light behaves when it finds a subject that believes it does not deserve to be seen. I pointed to the sign. "You still develop film." "We do," she said. "Not much call for it now, but old habits are stubborn." She smiled with her eyes. "Stubborn can be good when it keeps something worth saving alive." I nodded. I chose my words with the care I use when I do not know if the next sentence will break a thing or heal it. "I am looking for someone who might have worked in a place like this. A woman who was very good at seeing. A woman who knew about hiding in plain sight. She would be in her 50s now. She used to run a bookshop by the bay." The change in her face was so small that another person might not have noticed it. The hand that reached for the pencil stopped just before the fingers touched the wood. Her eyes moved a fraction toward the photo of the child with the pencil. She looked back at me. "We have had many people through here," she said. Her tone tried for casual. It did not reach it. I took out my wallet and slid a worn photograph across the counter. The young woman with the fighting smile and the baby gripping her shirt. The frame of the sign that said Sloan's Anchor just visible on the edge. The woman behind the counter did not touch the photo. She studied it the way a person studies a tide table before deciding to swim. She was brave, I said. It was not a tactic. It was the truth. She wanted to make sure children learned how to write sentences that could stand up in the wind. The woman looked at the door as if she expected the bell to speak again. It did not. The shop held its breath. She returned her gaze to me and kept it there long enough to show that she had decided something. "We close for lunch at 1, she said. "If you come back then, the shop will be quiet. We can talk without the bell telling the whole street what we are doing." "Thank you," I said. She nodded once. The nod felt like a delicate key turning in a patient lock. I took the photo back and slid it into my wallet. I left the shop with the bell's small sound at my back and the river's light ahead of me. The sky had opened into a real morning at last. I walked to the river and stood with my hands in my pockets and my shoulders loose the way I have learned to stand when I want to look ordinary. I watched the water slide past with its secret speed. A white sedan turned the corner and did not stop. The rear bumper carried a dent that could have been any story. It moved on without a glance. I watched it go. I memorized the license plate with the easy click of a mind that has collected such things for years. At noon, I sat in the public library 2 blocks from the shop and read a bound volume of the local paper. Old stories whispered to each other under dry covers. A brief mentioned a new tenant on River Street. A camera shop that promised 1-hour prints and a gentle hand with damaged negatives. Another brief mentioned a mysterious donor who had settled a debt for the youth center and refused to be named. The librarian told me Wexler likes to keep good secrets. "We do not have many," she said, "so the few we have are worth protecting." 1 o'clock arrived like a friend I had known in another life. I folded the paper, thanked the librarian, and walked back to the shop. The street was quiet. The bell would ring once and then the truth would have to learn a new way to breathe. I put my palm on the door and felt the cool of the glass. I made a promise to myself that whatever I learned next would not make me smaller. I opened the door and stepped inside. The door closed behind me with that same clear note, a single thread of sound that seemed to hang in the air long after the bell had stopped moving. The woman, Elena Stone, according to the small plaque by the register, was waiting by the counter. She had untied her apron. Without it, she looked lighter, less like a shopkeeper and more like someone prepared to remember. She gestured toward the back room. I followed her through a narrow hallway lined with shelves of cameras in various states of repair. Each lens reflected a piece of light that slipped through the curtains. The air smelled of developer, coffee, and dust that had agreed to stay put. We stepped into a small office. A window faced the river, its glass softened by years of sun. On the wall hung a single photograph, a young woman at a typewriter, hair tied back, eyes turned toward the window. I recognized the half-smile even before I understood why. Elena closed the door. The click sounded like the start of a confession. "You came from Halcyon Bay," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "You already knew that." Everyone from the Bay carries a particular stillness when they walk into this town. It's how people look when they expect to see ghosts. I smiled faintly. "And do you?" I stopped expecting. They arrive when they want. I set my bag on the desk and took out the photo, the same one I'd shown her earlier. I placed it beside the framed image on her wall. "This is her, isn't it?" I asked. Elena took a slow breath. "It's been a long time since anyone brought that picture here." She traced the outline of the young woman's face with a fingertip that didn't quite touch the paper. "Where did you find it?" "In a safe deposit box." Along with a legal file about the Sloan Education Endowment and a postcard that should have reached me 2 years ago. Her eyes flickered. She reached for the edge of the desk as if steadying herself against a wave. "Then you know my name." "Eleanor Sloan." The words came out quieter than I meant them to. "You're my mother." Silence. A small boat moved along the river outside, its engine a low murmur. She turned toward the window, hands clasped in front of her as if the glass might bless her courage. "I didn't think I would hear you say that," she said. "I wasn't sure I deserved to." I waited. I have learned that silence can be kinder than questions. She sat on the edge of the desk and looked at me directly. 12 years ago, I uncovered a chain of contracts that turned scholarship money into bonuses for people who already had too much. Victor Hale was at the center of it. He came to me one night, said he could protect me if I gave him temporary control of the endowment. He spoke about safety as if it were a currency. I wanted to believe him. Her voice cracked once, then steadied. "When the threats started, letters slipped under my door, photos of you on your way to school, I panicked. Meredith begged me to leave for a while. She promised she'd take care of you until I could come back. She didn't know how far Victor would go. Neither of us did." "You faked your death," I said. "I disappeared. There's a difference. Faking requires an audience." I simply left before one could be found. I felt my pulse in my fingertips. All those years of small holes in my history, questions about why we moved houses so often, why my mother never used the word father, all of them began to line up like stars that had been waiting for the right night. "Why the postcard?" I asked. "I needed to know if you were safe. I thought sending it through a friend would be harmless. I told her to deliver it when you turned 30. I see now it never reached you." "Meredith kept it," I said. "She said she wanted safety." Eleanor closed her eyes. Fear is the twin of love in some people's hearts. It wears the same face until the light changes. I wanted to be angry, but the anger felt small against the fact of her breathing in the same room. "Victor used your disappearance to take everything," I said. "He moved the endowment into a company called North Star Learning. Charlotte Hale runs it on paper. They used your work to buy cars and trips." Eleanor's jaw tightened. He turned words meant to lift people into a machine that paid for silence. I suspected it but could not prove it from here. She looked at me. "You can." "I have help," I said. "A lawyer who believes in records." "You have more than that," she said. "You have the truth, and the truth is noisy when it wakes up." She opened a drawer and pulled out a small cassette tape. "This is a copy of the interview that made Victor nervous." I kept it because the original vanished from the paper's archive. I turned the cassette in my hand. "The one about the education budget?" She nodded. "He was already shifting funds through shell accounts then. Listen to it. The details will sound like dust at first, but dust builds when it's ignored." Outside, the river light flickered across her face. For the first time, I saw the full shape of my own eyes in hers. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Finish what I started," she said simply. "Not for me, for the work, for the children who still believe that stories can save them." The words landed inside me like coordinates. "I will," I said, "but you need to come back with me. The court will need your testimony." She hesitated. "If I step back into that world, the people who buried me will want to finish the job." "Then we make sure they fail," I said. "You taught me that sentences can stand in the wind, so will we." Eleanor smiled a small, uncertain smile that seemed to surprise her. "You sound like someone I used to be." "I sound like your daughter," I said. She reached for my hand. Her skin was warm, her grip light but steady. "You do." We sat there for a moment that felt outside of time. The sound of the river filled the space where years should have been. When I finally left the shop, the sun was high and the streets had woken. The white sedan was parked across from a bakery this time, its windshield glinting like an unread answer. I noted the license plate again and sent it to Harlan with a single line, "He's still watching." He replied within a minute, "Good, let him. The more he watches, the more he leaves evidence." I started the car, the cassette lying on the seat beside me. The label read Interview Master Education funds Halcyon Bay. I thought about how many ghosts live in plain daylight. Then I turned the key. The engine caught. The road home stretched ahead, and with it, the work of turning truth into something that could stand in court. Somewhere behind me, the bell above the shop door rang once more. I like to think it was my mother stepping outside to watch me drive away, the light catching in her hair like the first line of a story finally being written again. By the time I reached the city line, the river light was behind me, and the bay wind had found its old way under my collar. I drove the last miles with the cassette on the seat like a quiet passenger. The label was written in a hand I had already learned to trust. Interview Master. Education funds Halcyon Bay. It had the calm of a fuse before a match. Harlan called as I turned off the highway. I answered on speaker. He never wastes the opening sentence. "I filed the demand for accounting," he said. "Certified mail and electronic service. North Star will see it before lunch tomorrow. We are asking for bank statements, contracts, invoices, compensation for officers, and all communications with trustees. If they stall, we move for a court order. If they produce, we invite them to perjure themselves on paper." I smiled despite the fatigue that sat inside my bones. "Good," I said. "I have something for you too." I told him about the cassette. He let out a soft whistle that said more than a paragraph. "Do not play it on a sentimental machine," he said. "We will digitize it first. Bring it to the office. In the meantime, do not talk to Victor without me." He said the last part the way people say do not touch that pot, it is hot. I promised nothing and everything at once. Home looked exactly like itself. The porch light waited like it always does. Victor's car was not in the drive. My mother sat at the kitchen table with a mug that had gone cold and a face that had forgotten how to pretend it had not been crying. She stood when she saw me and then sat again as if her legs remembered something her mind did not. "Did you find her?" she asked. I took the chair across from her and put my hand over hers. The simplest truth was the right one. "Yes, she is alive. She has been alive all this time." My mother shook once and covered her mouth. I thought she would ask me to forgive her. She did not. She said the better thing. Tell me what to do now. We are going to bring her in when the court is ready, I said. Until then, we do not say her name out loud anywhere that echoes. We keep the house boring. We keep our eyes open. If anyone asks, you tell them your daughter is busy with work. She nodded with a gratefulness that made my chest hurt. Then she reached for a drawer and pulled out a small digital recorder. Your grandfather used to keep notes on one of these, she said. I thought of it when you left this morning. If you need to put your voice somewhere safe, use it. I took the recorder. It fit my palm like it had been waiting for this exact job. I pressed record and spoke a simple timeline. Box, key, bank, addendum, postcard, threat call, Wexler, camera shop, Eliner, cassette, white sedan, plate, Harlan, demand for accounting. I ended the recording and saved it with a date. The plainness of the list steadied me. I drove to Harlan's office while the afternoon leaned toward evening. He occupies 2 rooms above a bakery where the air always smells like butter. He took the cassette from me with the tenderness people give to living things. He logged it, photographed it, sealed it in an evidence bag, then opened another bag and slid the tape back out like a magician who respects the rules of his craft. He has an old deck with clean heads for this kind of work. The transfer computer came awake with a polite screen. He set the tape, pressed play, and let the room fill with the soft hum of the past becoming present. The interview was a patience test for greed. A city accountant answered questions about line items that did not match. He described consulting contracts with limited detail and limitless invoices. He said things like temporary cash management and emergency allocation. Then he said 2 words that dried the air, Hail Foundation. Harlan paused the transfer and looked at me. We did not need to speak. We both heard the echo. He started the transfer again. The voice of the interviewer was my mother's voice when she is careful not to spook a bird. Calm, precise, encouraging the truth to walk toward the light without blinking. Toward the end of the tape, the accountant lowered his voice as if the microphone could be made to care about his fear. They told me it was for good optics, he said. They said families would be grateful. They said no one would check the receipts if the speech was sweet. When the file finished copying, Harlan backed it up twice. He burned a disk because sometimes the old ways are still the most dependable. He handed me a copy and kept 2, one for the file and one for the off-site archive. You need to rest, he said. Tomorrow we get loud. I left the office into a light that had the color of steel. The white sedan waited half a block down like a thought that refused to leave. I did not turn my head to look at it. I changed my route home and let the city teach me a few new streets. I stopped at a drugstore and bought a disposable phone with cash. I set it up to forward any calls from unknown numbers to a mailbox that eats sound for breakfast. Paranoia is a word people use for habits that keep other people safe. When I reached my mother's house, the porch light had not yet clicked on. I stood in the yard and looked at the window where my childhood desk used to be. On the other side of that glass, I had once drawn a moonlit square on paper until a hand took the box of crayons away. I walked back to the car and sat behind the wheel and let the day settle in strata. Then I called Charlotte. She answered with a bright voice that had been trained by rooms where everyone wears a tag. Monroe, what a surprise, she said, as if surprise was a dress she had chosen for the occasion. You received a demand for accounting, I said, her brightness dimmed by a careful degree. We did. I am sure this is all a misunderstanding. North Star has always acted in the best interest of the community. I kept my voice flat. The best interest of the community does not require a luxury vehicle. It does not require week-long branding retreats in cities more interested in cocktails than children. It does not require a cousin to sign her own checks. She laughed, a sound that tried to be friendly and landed as brittle. You always did have a flair for the dramatic, she said. I am not dramatic, I said. I am reading your ledger. She tried a different angle. We would prefer to resolve this discreetly, she said. Victor can arrange a meeting. He respects family. We are prepared to make you whole. I looked at the street through the windshield, at the tidy line of recycling bins waiting for collection. Make me whole is how people talk when they think wholeness can be purchased. I said no. Then I said it again, because repetition is sometimes the only way to teach a person what a word means. She went quiet long enough to let me hear her breathe. Then she said, you will regret this, and hung up. I saved the call and sent a summary to Harlan. He replied with a single check mark. It is his way of saying proceed. Inside, my mother had set out 2 bowls of soup and no questions. We ate with the silence of people who understand that food can be a balm and also a ritual. After, I checked the locks, checked the back door, checked the windows. I turned on a small lamp in the hall because shadows can invite stories we do not need tonight. My phone buzzed. A news alert. A local lifestyle site had posted a flattering piece about North Star's latest initiative to improve student outcomes. The photos looked expensive and careless. Charlotte stood in front of a mural with a brush she had probably held for the first time that day. Victor smiled the smile that suggests a donation already in his pocket. The caption read Partnership for Impact. I sent the link to Harlan with the note that this would be their public cover. He wrote back in under a minute. Good. Public cover creates public records. We will compare photos to invoices and mileage claims. Let them talk. I slept then, or I did the thing that looks like sleeping when you lie still and count to calm your heart. At 3, a car idled outside for a minute and then left. At 4, I woke from a dream where a lighthouse tilted and would not decide which way to fall. At 5, I got up, made coffee, and wrote for an hour with the recorder on the table. I described the girl in the diner with syrup on her cheek, the bell in the shop that told the truth, the smell of developer, the moment when Alina Stone became Alina Sloan without changing a single feature on her face. At 8 sharp, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a courier with a packet from North Star's council. Harlan arrived 2 minutes later, as if he had been waiting at the corner for the bell. We sat at the table and opened the envelope together. They had sent a stack of printed ledgers designed to look official. Harlan smiled when he saw the copies. He tapped the holes. They were made by a cheap machine you can buy at an office supply store. A real run would have clean edges. He turned a page slowly, then faster, then stopped and put his finger on a line. Vehicle lease for outreach, he read. He wrote the amount down and nodded at me. Compare with social media posts. He flipped again. Consulting for narrative strategy. He wrote the name of the firm and underlined it. Charlotte's friend. He flipped again and found a line that should not have been there if they were careful. Reimbursement for travel to Wexler. We both looked up at the same time. The room grew a degree colder. They had not expected a person with a notebook to walk into that town and ask a bell to tell the truth. We made copies of the copies and put the originals back in the envelope. Harlan sealed the packet with a strip of bright tape like a flag. He stood. We file the petition this afternoon, he said. Tomorrow we ask for a hearing. Victor will call. Do not pick up unless you cannot help yourself. If you do, hit record. My phone lit up before he finished the sentence. Victor's name sat on the screen like a warning placed by someone who has learned to love rules. I let it ring until the machine caught it. His voice arrived in the house like a visitor who does not remove his shoes. Monroe, he said, you are making a mistake. Family has a way of forgiving, but institutions do not. Think carefully. He paused for just long enough to make the next sentence land with a weight he had measured. You do not know everything about your mother. I smiled without humor. That is the oldest trick in the book, I said to the empty air and saved the message. I texted Alina a single sentence. He is already trying to make you the weapon. She replied with 2 words that felt like an answer to a prayer. Not this time. When Harlan left, the white sedan had returned to its favorite corner. I stood behind the curtain and watched it. I raised my phone and took a single photograph, the ordinary kind a neighbor might take when they want to remember a license plate for a parking complaint. I did not let anger write the caption in my head. I wrote a date and a time and a weather note. Rain story coming. Wind light. Witness present. I turned from the window and felt the day assemble itself. There is a moment before any fight when your body decides what kind of animal it will be. I chose the kind that keeps its teeth covered until the last necessary second. I chose the kind that knows the terrain better than the hunter. I chose the kind that has learned from mothers both present and missing that a story is a shelter and a weapon and a map. I picked up the recorder, pressed the red button, and began the next line. Morning broke clean and pale, the kind of light that doesn't promise much. Harlan and I walked the courthouse steps together, both of us carrying the weight of folders that meant more than paper. The clerk recognized him by name. Within 20 minutes, the petition was filed. The seal went down with a thud that sounded like a verdict's echo. As we stepped outside, the air tasted of salt. Down the street, a car door shut, and the white sedan rolled slowly past the curb, pausing long enough for me to see my own reflection in its window. They'll make mistakes now, Harlan said. When people think control is slipping, they grab too hard. He was right. By noon, the first mistake arrived. Charlotte posted a statement online. It was all polished sincerity, a reminder of North Star's transparent commitment to public service, a photo of smiling children with brand new notebooks. I watched the comments fill, half praise, half suspicion. Every praise came from an account that joined last week. Every suspicion carried a memory of something Northstar had promised and forgot. I spent the afternoon sorting receipts and matching them against travel dates from the ledger. The puzzle pieces began to fit. A Northstar conference in Phoenix overlapped with a Hale family vacation. A community outreach car lease matched the make and color of Charlotte's personal SUV. The numbers weren't clever, they were confident. That was always Victor's flaw. By evening, Harlan called again. "We have a hearing in 48 hours. Preliminary, they'll try to stall. We'll show the judge the tape if we must." I looked at the cassette's digital twin glowing on my laptop screen. Eleanor's calm voice filled the room. "You cannot save a community by stealing its future." Each word landed like a stone dropped in water, ripples widening until they touched everything I believed about her. I went to the window. The white sedan was gone this time, replaced by a van with tinted glass. I smiled without amusement. "Let them watch," I said to no one. "I'm done hiding." That night I drove back to the marina, the place where the city stopped pretending to be civilized. The wind off the water smelled of iron and memory. I dialed Eleanor on the disposable phone. She answered on the first ring. "They know," I said. "They always did," she replied. "Now they'll have to admit it. Will you come for the hearing?" "I will," she said, "but I'll arrive as Elena Stone. Let the truth walk in quietly before it raises its voice." Her plan made sense. The law respects witnesses who surprise gently. I told her about the white sedan, about Charlotte's post, about Victor's message that hinted at darker history. "He'll try to turn you against me," she said. "He'll say I left because of you." I was quiet for a moment. "Did you?" "No," she said. "I left because he said he'd take you if I stayed." The truth slid through me like cold water. I thanked her because it was the only thing left to say. The next day began with news that Northstar's accounts were frozen pending audit. Charlotte deleted her post. Victor went silent. Meredith moved through the house like someone who had misplaced her shadow. At sunset, I opened the recorder again. The small red light blinked and waited. "Day 10, I said. "We filed. They folded. I keep thinking about the postcard and what it means to receive love late but not lost. The people who built this cage are still walking free, but the bars are bending." Maybe that's what justice looks like at the start, not a clean win, just a sound of metal remembering how to move. The recording clicked off. Outside, thunder rolled far over the bay. Somewhere, a storm was making room for itself. Tomorrow would be the hearing. Tomorrow, the first crack in the Hale name would show. I placed the recorder beside the cassette, side by side like parent and child, and whispered the words that had carried me from attic dust to court steps. "Don't let anyone else write the story." Then I turned out the light. The courthouse lobby smelled of paper and polish and the kind of fear that only money understands. Cameras blinked from the hallway, polite and hungry. I walked past them with my chin level and my steps even. Harlan walked beside me carrying a slim folder, the kind of folder that looks innocent until opened. Victor waited near the elevator. His suit was navy, his smile pressed and polished. "Monroe," he said, "we could have done this quietly." "We are," I said. "The microphones are off inside." His jaw flexed once. He looked at Harlan. "Always the crusader." "Always paid by the hour," Harlan replied, brushing past him. Inside the courtroom, the judge looked like someone who had long ago stopped being impressed by theater. She adjusted her glasses and called the session to order. The first 30 minutes were procedural. Harlan stood, spoke, sat. Northstar's lawyer objected to everything except the existence of gravity. The judge let the noise play out, then cut through it. "I've reviewed the filings," she said. "Mr. Hale, you will submit complete financial records within 5 business days, and you will refrain from liquidating assets. If I find evidence of tampering, I will freeze every account you touch." Victor inclined his head. "Understood, Your Honor." The judge turned to Harlan. "Anything further?" Harlan lifted the small portable drive containing the digitized tape. "We have preliminary evidence that the funds originated in a public trust and were diverted through entities under Mr. Hale's control. We will submit the transcript once authenticated." "Do it by the end of the week," she said. Court adjourned. The gavel's sound was smaller than I expected. Still, it echoed. Outside, reporters gathered like gulls. Harlan's rule was simple: never feed the birds. We walked straight through, the folder tight in his hand. I could hear Victor behind us, his voice already rehearsing a statement about miscommunication, family misunderstandings, internal audits. It was the language of men who believe truth can be managed. When we reached the steps, a hand brushed my arm. Meredith. She had slipped through the crowd unseen. "He'll ruin you if he can," she whispered. "That's what he does when he loses control." "Then he'll finally learn what that feels like," I said. That evening, Alina arrived in Halcyon Bay. She came as Alina Stone, hair shorter, glasses on. She stepped into my kitchen and looked around like a visitor in a museum of her own life. Meredith stood by the window, unsure whether to run or reach out. Alina broke the silence first. "You kept her safe," she said softly. Meredith's voice trembled. "I kept her silent. That was the only safe you knew." The words landed without anger, and somehow that was worse. I made tea because sometimes small human acts are the only bridge between worlds. The three of us sat at the table where lies and truths had taken turns for years. I put the recorder between us and pressed record. "Tell it," I said. Alina began with the story of the endowment, how she'd built it after losing a colleague to a system that chewed idealists. She spoke about the classes at Sloan's Anchor, about the first student who published a story, about the night the letters came. She described Victor's visit, the way he promised safety and brought contracts. Meredith added her part in small, uneven sentences. How Victor convinced her that silence was protection. How fear became habit. How she opened the box every year on my birthday, then closed it again before sunrise. The tape caught everything. The pauses, the shared breath, the moment when Alina's hand covered Meredith's and neither pulled away. When it ended, I copied the file to Harlan's drive and labeled it Witness 1. Later, I stood by the window and watched the reflection of the two women behind me. They looked nothing alike and exactly the same. I saw where I came from and what I could become if I let either fear or fury own me. The next morning, the storm finally broke. Rain hammered the bay. My phone buzzed with a message from Harlan. "They moved assets last night. The judge froze all accounts. Check your email." I opened it. Attached were bank records, Victor's signature, Charlotte's authorization, transfers to a private consultancy overseas. It was over. The paper trail was complete, but winning on paper isn't the same as peace. Alina walked into the room holding a photo, the one of the bookstore window with the chalk words still visible. "Bring your first sentence and a pencil." She smiled. "When this ends, I want to open it again," she said. "Not when," I told her. "Now," she looked at me. "We might not have funds yet." "We have a name," I said. "That's currency enough," she laughed quietly. It was the first sound of hope I'd heard in years. Outside, sirens wailed somewhere toward the harbor. The white sedan had finally vanished. For the first time since the attic, the world felt like it belonged to its own morning. I pressed record one last time. "Day 12, I said. "The court froze the accounts. The lies have nowhere left to hide. My mother is here, both of them. The story is still being written, but it's ours now." I stopped the recorder. The red light faded. And with it, the past began to loosen its grip. The next 2 days unfolded like a storm caught inside glass. Reporters camped outside the courthouse steps, their umbrellas forming a moving sea of colors. Words like embezzlement and fraudulent transfer started to appear in headlines that used to praise Victor's philanthropy. Charlotte's name trailed behind his like a broken wing. Harlan and I spent those hours inside, sorting through the paperwork that would become our ammunition. Every receipt, every email, every whisper of self-interest was lined up until the story told itself. I had grown up believing justice was an event. Now I knew it was a process, slow and unkind and necessary. On the morning of the hearing, the air was still. The judge entered without ceremony. Victor and Charlotte sat together at the defense table, all polite angles and expensive fabric. Their lawyer began with a practice sigh. "North Star Learning has always acted in the best interests of the community," he said, and I thought how strange it is that lies always begin with always. Harlan waited until the judge nodded. Then he played the tape. Alina's voice filled the room, calm, patient, deadly. She asked questions that peeled layers off a system designed to look clean. The accountant's confession came next, his voice trembling. He named the shell companies, the forged signatures, the orders that came directly from Victor Hale. Victor shifted in his seat. Charlotte went pale. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Hale, did you authorize these transactions?" Victor smiled, the same smile that had opened galas and charmed donors. "I managed temporary transfers to protect our assets during a volatile period," he said. "All funds were returned." Harlan handed her a printout of the latest bank logs. "Returned," he said, "to a consultancy registered in the Cayman Islands under your initials, the same day you filed for bankruptcy protection." For a moment, the courtroom forgot how to breathe. The judge's gavel came down hard. "Enough," she said. "This court orders immediate seizure of North Star's remaining accounts pending full review. Mr. Hale, you will surrender your passport. Ms. Hale, you will provide a sworn statement by tomorrow." Rest was noise, reporters shouting, cameras flashing, the sound of papers shuffling like wings. I walked out into the daylight and saw Alina waiting by the courthouse steps. She looked smaller than I remembered, but steady, as if gravity had finally remembered to hold her gently. "It's done," I said. "It started," she corrected. We walked together to the edge of the square where the noise faded. Meredith joined us, holding a small folder of photographs from the old bookstore. She handed one to Alina. The chalk words were faint but still legible. "Bring your first sentence and a pencil." Alina smiled. "We'll write it again," she said. The following weeks blurred into logistics. The court appointed an interim board to rebuild the endowment. Harlan became its legal advisor. I took a seat as acting director, though the title meant less than the work. Alina, still legally Alina Stone, accepted the role of consultant. Meredith ran the tiny office above the bay where the new ledger lived. We reopened Sloane's Anchor on a Saturday morning. The walls were repainted, but the air still carried the faint scent of dust and stories. Children filled the chairs, pencils in hand, waiting for something to begin. Alina stood at the front, reading the first line from a notebook she had kept hidden for 12 years. Every story starts with something someone tried to hide. When she looked up, our eyes met. The years between us collapsed into a single shared breath. Later, when the children had gone, I sat alone by the window overlooking the water. The bay was calm again, silver light shifting over its surface. I turned on the recorder one final time. "Day 40, I said. "The endowment lives, the thieves are caught. The ghosts have names now. My mother teaches again. The world hasn't forgiven itself, but it's trying. I think that's what survival means, keeping the door open for a better ending." I stopped the recording and placed it beside the postcard. The words on the back had faded, but the ink still carried its shape. "For your 30th birthday. Love, E. Sloane." Outside, the bell above the shop door rang as another child walked in, holding a notebook too big for her hands. Alina's voice drifted from the doorway, warm and alive. "Come in," she said. "Let's find your first sentence." And just like that, the story began again. The news spread faster than we could breathe. By the end of the week, the words "trust fraud conviction pending" appeared on every screen in Halcyon Bay. People who once toasted Victor at charity dinners now avoided his name as if it were contagious. Charlotte vanished from public view. The white sedan was impounded near the docks, abandoned, plates wiped clean. Still, I knew peace never arrives without a bill. Every victory carries a quiet cost. We kept the bookstore open late those first few nights. Children left behind half-written stories, the air thick with the smell of pencils and rain-damp shoes. Alina said their sentences reminded her of survival, short, stubborn, beautiful. She looked at them the way gardeners look at green shoots pushing through concrete. Harlan's updates came in bursts. The forensic audit revealed more layers than even he expected. Dummy nonprofits, forged grant proposals, a whole paper forest grown from greed. But the law is patient when it finally wakes. One evening, when the rain pressed against the glass, I found Alina on the back porch with a cigarette she never intended to light. She rolled it between her fingers like a habit she'd almost forgiven. "You know," she said, "Victor wasn't always a thief. He started as a believer. I met him when he volunteered to help with the first writing workshop. He used to talk about redemption. The dangerous kind, the kind that wants applause." "Did you ever love him?" I asked. She laughed once, quietly. "I loved the idea of him, the version that wanted to build something good, but men like that think goodness is a stage. When the applause ends, they build a new act." Her eyes drifted toward the bay. "He'll fight back. People like Victor don't accept endings written by others." I knew she was right. The next morning, the fight arrived. An anonymous leak hit the local press, a story implying that Alina had falsified early grant records, that she'd fled to avoid prosecution, that her reappearance was a ploy for sympathy. The words were venom disguised as concern. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Harlan called before I could. "They're desperate," he said. "We'll file a counterstatement by noon, but it's not about facts anymore. It's about noise." I walked to the window. Outside, children were drawing with chalk on the sidewalk, bright pink suns and names of pets. For a moment, I wanted to believe that innocence could drown out propaganda. Then the thought passed. "We'll fight with receipts," I said. Harlan chuckled. "That's my favorite weapon." By evening, we held a press conference inside the bookstore. Reporters packed the small space that once held nothing but paperbacks and quiet. Alina stood at the counter, glasses perched low, voice clear. "I am not a ghost," she said. "I am a journalist who did her job. I built a fund for children who couldn't afford silence. If telling the truth cost me 12 years, so be it. but it will not cost these children their future. Flashbulbs went off like small storms. When it ended, she stepped outside into the drizzle. People applauded from across the street, not many, but enough. For a moment, Halcyon Bay remembered decency. That night, the house was finally still. Meredith slept with a book open on her chest. Eleanor sat by the window, writing longhand in a notebook. I sat beside her. "What are you writing?" I asked. "A statement," she said. "For the hearing, but it's also for you." I leaned closer. The first line read, "My daughter taught me that silence isn't safety. It's surrender." I didn't speak. I just let the words live in the air between us. When I finally went to bed, I dreamed of the old attic, the one where this story began. The smell of damp wood, the small brass key, the dust that glowed like pollen in a beam of light. Only this time, when I opened the box, there wasn't paper inside, just a mirror, and my own face looking back, steady, unafraid. Morning brought sunlight for the first time in weeks. The tide was calm, and so was I. Tomorrow we would face Victor again. But tomorrow didn't scare me anymore. The next morning came wrapped in a kind of stillness that felt planned. The city was quiet, but it wasn't peace. It was the inhale before a verdict. The courthouse steps shimmered with sunlight and camera flashes. Harlan and I stood near the door, our shoulders almost touching, waiting for the clerk to open the room that would decide everything. Victor arrived first. He looked different this time, not defeated, but hollow. The charm that once sat behind his eyes had thinned to something desperate. Charlotte followed a step behind, sunglasses hiding the kind of fear that has run out of disguises. The hearing began at 9. The prosecutor presented the paper trail, forged signatures, transfers masked as community outreach, consultancy payments that went nowhere except into Victor's private accounts. Harlan guided the judge through each exhibit as if he were laying stones across a river. When my turn came, I stood and told the story as cleanly as I could. About the key, the box, the folder with my name, the voice on the phone warning me to stay away. About the camera shop and the postcard that arrived too late. About how my mother came back with proof that silence was the only crime she had ever committed. The courtroom listened. For once, even Victor didn't interrupt. Then the judge asked if there were any final statements. Eleanor rose. Her voice carried no tremor. "You can destroy a building," she said, "but not an idea. You can erase my name from ledgers, but not from the children who learned to write their first truth here. This isn't about money. It's about what happens when people think goodness is a brand they can buy." The judge watched her a long time before speaking. "The court finds sufficient grounds for a full criminal trial. The defendant is remanded to custody." The gavel fell, sharp as thunder. Outside, light burst across the steps. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras blinked. Victor was led through the crowd in cuffs, his face a mask of disbelief. Charlotte wept behind a veil of microphones. Eleanor stood beside me, one hand clutching the edge of her coat. "It's over," she whispered. "No," I said, watching the flashes stutter against the courthouse glass. "It's just finally true." We walked away without looking back. The bay wind picked up, carrying the smell of salt and ink. That evening, the three of us, Eleanor, Meredith, and I, sat in the bookstore long after closing. The children's chalk drawings still covered the sidewalk outside. Inside, the light fell soft across the tables, and the shelves breathed dust like memory. Eleanor opened her notebook and began to write again. Meredith brewed tea without a word. I set the recorder down and pressed record. "Day 45, I said quietly. "The lies are finished. The trial will come, but the truth has already begun its work. The shop is open. The children are writing. My mothers are both here, whole in their own ways." I thought justice would feel loud, but it feels like this, quiet, steady, alive. Eleanor looked up and smiled. "Write that down," she said. "I just did," I told her. Outside, the lighthouse blinked once across the dark bay as if it knew the story had found its ending. But I also knew better. Stories like ours never really end. They only learn how to begin again. A week passed before the noise began to fade. The headlines softened, the cameras turned toward newer storms, and Halcyon Bay remembered how to breathe again. The mornings felt different, quiet, almost shy, like a city that had been through confession and was learning how to speak softly again. The bookstore became the heartbeat of that calm. Every day children came with their notebooks, and Eleanor greeted them like old friends. She'd walk between the tables, pausing to read a sentence aloud, always with that same look of gentle awe as if each line could rewrite the world. One afternoon, after the last student left, she sat beside me in the window seat. The light slanted across her face, warm and human. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" she asked. "I used to," I said. "Now I just wait for the next page." She smiled. That's the right kind of writer. Harlan stopped by later that evening. He looked lighter too, though the dark circles under his eyes still spoke of late nights. He carried a folder, thinner than before, which was a good sign. Pre-trial conference is set, he said. Victor's team is negotiating a plea. He'll trade information for leniency. What information? I asked. The names of other foundations, Harlan said. Turns out North Star wasn't the only one he hollowed out. He looked at me over the folder. This could expose something bigger than Halcyon Bay. Eleanor exhaled slowly. Then the work isn't over. No, Harlan said, but at least now we're standing in daylight. He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was the official notice, Monroe Robbins, Acting Director, Sloan Educational Trust, my name on paper, legal, final. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until Eleanor squeezed my hand. It's yours now, she said. No, I told her. It's ours. We reopened the old lighthouse 2 days later, the one that used to guide ships before the harbor automation took over. The city had planned to tear it down years ago, but Eleanor convinced the council to lease it to us instead. Let it guide stories now, she said. We painted the inside white, hung student photographs along the walls, and placed a long wooden table in the center for writing workshops. The air smelled of salt and new beginnings. When the door opened that first morning, children ran up the spiral stairs, their laughter echoing through the tower like wind returning to an old home. Later, when the sun fell and the sea turned gold, Eleanor and I stood outside watching the light sweep across the bay. The water glittered in slow motion. You know, she said, I kept a copy of every story written at Sloan's Anchor, even the ones that only had 3 lines. I thought someday, when the world felt less cruel, I'd read them again. Maybe now, I said. She nodded, maybe now. That night after she went to bed, I sat at the lighthouse table alone. The tide murmured outside like a patient metronome. I took out the recorder again, pressed the red button, and let my voice fill the empty space. Day 50, I said. The light is back. The lies have names and sentences. The bay has found its rhythm again, but I still hear the echo of those words. Every story starts with something someone tried to hide. Maybe that's why we keep telling them to turn secrets into lanterns. I paused, listening to the sea breathe against the stone. I used to think the story ended when justice arrived, I said. Now I know justice is just another kind of beginning. I switched off the recorder, left it on the table, and climbed to the top of the lighthouse. The night was clear, the stars sharp. Below, the bookstore lights blinked softly in the dark, one for every child still writing, still believing. For the first time since I found that key, I wasn't chasing ghosts. I was standing among the living. The next morning smelled of salt and coffee and new paint. I unlocked the bookstore doors before sunrise, the way Eleanor used to do when the world still felt fragile. The bell over the door made that same soft note, and for a moment I thought she might be there already, rearranging the books, humming to herself. But it was only me, the silence, and the slow light creeping across the floorboards. I opened the shutters and let the bay breathe in. Fishing boats drifted past, their engines low and steady. The city was starting its day. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the need to brace for what might come next. Eleanor appeared a few minutes later carrying 2 cups of coffee. You're up early, she said. Couldn't sleep? That's what happens when peace feels unfamiliar. She smiled and handed me a cup. You'll get used to it. We spent the morning sorting through stacks of manuscripts, stories written by the students, some barely longer than a paragraph, others stitched together from wild, uneven dreams. Each one was a small rebellion against silence. When Harlan stopped by, he brought news that Victor had taken the plea deal. 10 years, with the possibility of early release if he testified against other foundations. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was a record, the kind of truth that could live in archives. What happens now? I asked. Harlan shrugged. The rest of them start running, and we keep building. He looked at Eleanor, then at me. You two have done something that can't be undone. Don't let the world forget how. After he left, we sat outside by the water. Meredith joined us, her hair catching the wind. She looked different too, lighter, unburdened, as if her silence had finally exhaled. Eleanor took out a thin notebook and flipped to the first page. It was empty. You know, she said, I think this place deserves a new beginning, a story that belongs to all of us. I nodded. What should we call it? She looked toward the horizon. The Anchor's Light. It fit. That evening, we hosted a small gathering, students, neighbors, anyone who believed in words more than rumors. Candles lined the windowsills. The lighthouse beam swept across the water like a slow pulse. Eleanor read aloud from the first story written that day by a boy who barely spoke in class. It was about a ship that had no map but followed the stars anyway. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then someone began to clap, and another, and soon the whole room filled with a sound that felt like home. Later, after everyone left, I stood by the lighthouse balcony. The sea was dark and endless, but the light kept turning, patient, constant, alive. I held the postcard in my hand, its edges soft now from being carried too long. "For your 30th birthday. Love, E. Sloan." I whispered to the air, "I got it, a little late, but I got it." The wind carried the words out over the bay. Somewhere below, a child laughed, the sound bright and sure. I turned back toward the glow of the bookstore where my mother's shadows moved across the shelves. The past was finally quiet. The story was still going, but now it belonged to all of us. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The summer came quietly, the way forgiveness does, slow, unsure, but real. The bay turned warmer, softer, and so did the days. The bookstore's bell sang each morning when the children arrived, their notebooks tucked under their arms like treasure maps. The chalkboard in the front window now read, "Every story is a light. Find yours." Eleanor spent most of her time teaching again. She never called it teaching, though. She said she was only reminding the young how to remember. Sometimes I'd find her sitting at the back table, surrounded by paper towers and pencils worn down to ghosts, her laughter spilling out like sunlight over ink. Meredith ran the accounts, careful, precise, proud of how simple good money looked on paper. For me, the days were divided between rebuilding and relearning. Rebuilding trust in the endowment's name, and relearning how to live without looking over my shoulder. The recorder still sat on my desk, now filled with files labeled day 1 through day 60. I didn't record every day anymore, just the ones that felt like chapters worth keeping. One afternoon, a letter arrived addressed in careful handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a folded page and a photograph. The page read, "Dear Ms. Robbins, my brother was one of the students your endowment helped years ago. He's in college now, first in our family. He still keeps the pencil from that workshop. Said it made him believe words could belong to him too. Thank you for fighting for people you'll never meet. With gratitude, Lillian Hayes." The photo showed a boy at a graduation ceremony, his cap tilted too far back, smiling into sunlight. Behind him, a small sign read Sloan Scholarship Fund. I stared at it for a long time, then took it to Eleanor. She smiled, the kind that starts in the chest and works its way out. "Proof," she said softly, "that the story kept going, even when we couldn't see the pages." That night, we held an open mic at the bookstore, students, locals, anyone who had something to say. The air smelled of dust and ink and rain that hadn't fallen yet. I stood in the back and watched as the smallest girl in the room climbed onto the stage, her hair pulled back with a red ribbon. She unfolded her notebook and read, "A lighthouse doesn't move, but the world still finds it. I think that's what love is." When she finished, the room went quiet. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor looked at me then, her eyes wet, her smile proud. "That's your story now," she whispered. "It found you." Later, when everyone had gone and the last of the candlelight trembled on the tables, I walked outside. The lighthouse beam turned above the water, patient as ever. I held the recorder, pressed the red button, and began to speak. "Day 70, I said. "The world still spins, and so do we. Justice became memory, and memory became work. The children have built something we never could, a place where stories don't end with fear." I paused, listening to the wind move through the open door. Sometimes I think about that night at the bank when everything began. If I could speak to the version of myself who held that brass key, I'd tell her this: you don't open boxes to find ghosts. You open them to let the living out. The waves answered softly, brushing the stones. "I think," I said, "that's what this has always been about." The red light blinked once, then steadied. I let it run a few seconds longer, capturing the sound of the sea, the truest witness of all. The next morning would bring more stories, more children, more beginnings. But for now, in the quiet glow of the lighthouse, I finally felt what Eleanor had been trying to teach me all along. The past doesn't vanish. It learns how to tell the truth. The next few weeks unfolded in a rhythm that felt almost ordinary, mornings with coffee and sea breeze, afternoons filled with chalk dust and laughter, evenings wrapped in the hum of the lighthouse beams sweeping the bay. It was the kind of peace that doesn't erase the past, but lets it sit quietly beside you, like an old friend who no longer needs to apologize. We began archiving everything: the case files, the newspaper clippings, the student essays. Eleanor insisted on keeping them in a glass cabinet at the bookstore. "Not trophies," she said, "reminders. The truth ages better when it's written down." Meredith became our historian. She spent hours labeling boxes, her handwriting neat and unhurried. Watching her work, I realized how different she looked now, no longer the woman who flinched at every phone ring, but someone who had learned that survival could also be gentle. One afternoon, while I was updating the trust's digital records, an email arrived from an unknown address. The subject line read, "Thank you for keeping the light on." The message was simple. I was one of the kids who wrote in that bookstore years ago. You helped me find my first sentence. Now I teach others to do the same. Please tell Ms. Sloan the light never went out, it just moved. I read it twice before showing Alina. She closed her eyes and smiled. "Then we did it right," she said. "The light doesn't belong to us anymore." That night, the three of us walked down to the dock where the water shimmered under the moon. The air was thick with the smell of salt and wood, and the lighthouse cast a steady path across the black surface of the bay. Alina leaned on the railing. "You know," she said, "I used to think stories were about who gets the last word, but maybe they're about who keeps listening after it's spoken." Meredith nodded. "And who dares to speak next?" I looked out at the horizon, the same line I'd seen my whole life, and finally understood what they meant. The world doesn't end with endings, it folds into new beginnings like pages pressed together. Before we left, I took out the recorder one last time. "Day 90, I said. "We built something that breathes. The endowment lives, the children write, and the water keeps carrying our echoes farther than we'll ever see. I used to believe truth was something you found. Now I know it's something you build, sentence by sentence." I turned off the recorder and set it down on the railing beside the postcard, the same one that had started everything. The wind caught its corner, lifting it for a heartbeat before laying it flat again, as if even the bay didn't want to let it go. Alina reached over, her fingers brushing mine. "Keep it," she said. "Every story needs proof it existed." I slipped the card back into my pocket. The lighthouse beam swept past, painting us all in gold. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was standing in the middle of a story that someone else had written. I was standing in the light of one I'd finally finished and ready for the next one to begin.